second. We're live, Peter Collins.
How exciting.
Peter Collins, you're one of the, I would say, one of the most legendary producers in the music business, and my mentor. And everybody loves what you've done for music and inspired millions. And I just want to ask you some questions because I'm sure there are a lot of people that would love to know.
Thank you for those kind words.
Well, they're very true. Um, First of all, and as long as I've known you and worked for you in the past, never asked you what inspired you to be a producer. What was the thing that lit you up?
Well, I was an artist when I was a teenager. I was signed to Decca in London when I was 19. And I walked into a studio with my guitar, and there was a studio full of musicians there to play my music. And it was my first experience of being in a real recording studio. I've been in demo studios in London, but not a real recording studio. And there I was, and my uncle was actually producing my record. His name was Mel Collins.
Oh, wow.
And Mel was not really a producer, but he didn't want to have anybody produce the record because he felt very close to my music and myself, obviously. And I got a sense of what a producer does, hiring the arranger, hiring the musicians, hiring the engineer, and choosing the studio. And I made my record, and found myself actually much more interested in what was going on in the control room than my music and performing. I realized that actually being a performer was not really what I wanted to do. I wanted to be that guy controlling all the elements that go into making a record. I was just fascinated with the whole thing. I was making demos at home on a Revox tape recorder, quarter-inch tape, and bouncing between the tracks. And so going into I think it was 8-track in those days. And I said, this is what I want to do. So I went from being a Decca recording artist to getting a job at the studio as a gopher, where I filled up the Coke machine, made cups of tea for the producers, ran for them, bought their cigars, did whatever needed to be done.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and that's how I decided I want to be a producer.
That is crazy. I didn't know that. I didn't know you were ever like somebody that worked at a studio that was so okay. So I did follow in your footsteps because that's exactly.
Were you an artist as well?
I was very young. At 14, 15 years old, I was in the studio. We got us a little development deal and went in and of course we didn't never get the big tamale, but we had a great band, and the producer, first it was just me and the band producing the stuff, and then Jimmy Griffin from Bread, which was my girlfriend's uncle, he came to my hometown and he saw us and he goes, I'm going to take this to LA and I'm going to try to get something done. And then we got a producer after that, and he was terrible. He stayed at the strip club more than he did the studio, and I was mad even at 14. I think it was kind of cool going to the strip club at 14 years old, but it wasn't cool that he wasn't paying attention to my music, and that was, I already was inspired by you with Operation Mindcrime. When I heard that inspired me. That's what I want to do, because if I could make kids feel like I feel right now, I want to be this guy, Peter Collins. And I told my mother that at 11 years old.
Extraordinary.
And then I just worked my ass off as a guitar player and piano player to get the musical ability to become that. And then, I was led a little astray, and I thought I had to be an engineer. But then I went, okay, well, if I become an engineer, I can work for Peter. And then 15 years later, there I was working for you.
And you were fabulous, Malcolm. Very efficient and fun to be around.
It was a dream come true working for you. And I've never asked you, because we've always been working or hanging, talking about personal matters and stuff. And, you give me advice on being a father and to being a producer, and telling me the same thing that you always tell me. And that is, you have to make a decision, whether it be right or it be wrong. You have to make a decision.
Well, actually, that is true. But Geddy Lee from Rush once said to me he was working with a producer who was very indecisive, and eventually Geddy went up to him, grabbed him by the collar, and said, "Make a decision, even if it's the wrong one."
Well, that was some of the questions that I wanted to ask you, and I think no, I know that because I've called a few people to ask them what would you like for me to ask Peter? Because I know that you want me to ask him about some of the records that we listened to when we were younger. And I want to know, and so does a couple other producers. Matter of fact, Kyle, you just met, he wanted to know how you obtained getting the Power Windows record. How was your break into it like that? I mean, how did you get, because you were in England, right? I mean,
I was
so
living in England.
so how did you get a band from Canada? I mean, I don't understand.
Well, I was asked to produce an artist called Gary Moore. I don't know if you've heard of Gary Moore.
Oh yeah, well, you're a huge Gary Moore fan, actually.
Yeah, and I'd not worked with Gary, and Virgin Records, Virgin 10, one of the A&R guys there said, "We want you to produce, to redo a track that Jeff Glixman has produced with Gary." Jeff had produced a whole album, but there was one song they wanted me to rework called "Empty Rooms." So Gary was on tour with Rush, and he was opening up for Rush. In those days, they would have an opening band. This was the 80s. So in order to do that, I had to fly to Los Angeles and take an engineer from England with me and record Gary while he was on tour with Rush. So I went into a studio in LA and recorded Gary, did the whole track, and finished it off in England. And Rush, because they'd heard Gary performing this song live every night, and then they heard what I'd done with this track, they were curious enough to want to interview me. So they flew me from England to Providence, Rhode Island, where they were performing. And I met with them and I talked to them about what I thought about their music. And I'd never actually even heard of Rush when I was living in England. Even though they were huge and they were huge in Europe. I just wasn't aware. You know, I was a pop music kind of guy.
Right.
And so I critiqued what I thought of their sound, which in the 80s, you know, everything was super high tech, and in England was the kind of the cutting edge of high tech technology with sound technology. And so when I listened to their music, it sounded very dated to me sonically. So I criticized it and told them I thought Geddy's voice could sound much better, and I thought that the overall sonic quality could be much better and more exciting. And they apparently what I said had resonated with them, and I got the gig.
Wow, of course, you know them. You recorded them. You've done records with them, so you're probably pretty close to the band. God, I couldn't even imagine sitting and having a conversation and telling Geddy Lee his vocals could sound better. To me, that's ridiculously crazy to me.
Well, those guys, they don't want somebody to say, "You're fantastic, we love everything."
Right.
They want to hear, if they're going to hire somebody, they want somebody who's going to make a difference. To roll forward, when we were thinking about making counterparts, and we were looking for an engineer, I really liked Kevin Caveman Shirley for a work that he had done with an Australian band called Baby Animals. It was a very organic sounding record, and so we flew Kevin up to Canada to interview with the band. Mm-hmm. And so Kevin listens and he says, "You know, the drums sound thin and the guitars sound thin," and he was very critical of the sound of the record that I had produced with Rush. And so we hired him because we wanted to do something different. We wanted to do go back to a more organic sound from the hyped up 80s sound.
That's incredible because of you, I hired him to mix. I was telling you earlier, I hired him to mix a band called Cinch, and Jack Joseph had mixed the song before that. Mr. Puig, I love that guy. He's just a great soul. I got to get him on here. Definitely, he's on the list. But Kevin Caveman Shirley just really brought the thing It's funny because your loud guitar thing that you do, I could tell when I listened to it, I could tell that he had worked with you. Put it this way, he had a little bit of that Peter Collins in him on the mix. That's for damn sure. Um, I want to ask you some more about the Rush thing. If you don't feel comfortable, ask. What was was Neil Peart like the driving creative force of the band, melodically and lyrically, or just lyrically?
Just lyrically.
And he wrote the lyrics.
Except Tom Sawyer, he didn't write that lyric. I think it was Pi Dubois wrote that. I think, and he wrote. He didn't write Test. Well, there was one song on Test for Echo that he, I think, co-wrote, but for the most part, he wrote all the lyrics.
That's so interesting. So they had a co-writer on Tom Sawyer.
I know. I don't. Yeah, they did, but yeah, the lyrics were written by somebody else.
That's incredible. But now, musically, was it a collaboration or was it like did somebody come? I mean, I'm sorry to ask such
No,
crazy
it's no
questions.
problem. It was a total collaboration.
Okay.
You know, Geddy and Alex would work out, just mess around, come up with some ideas, come up with some melodies, make a demo, give it to Neil. Neil would then come up with the lyric. They'd go back and rework their ideas, and it would be a backwards and forwards between Geddy and Alex, who kind of separated themselves out, did their thing, and then Neil would have some perspective, write the lyric, come up with suggestions, and then eventually when a song was kind of pieced together, then Neil would figure out all his drum arrangement.
That's so interesting. So it started out because me as a kid, me being a bass player in the band that that I was in earlier in life, and a string bass player in an orchestra. I always looked at like the Rush thing as the Geddy Lee coming up with this awesome bass line, and then here comes Alex, and then they'll add the groove in. So I was almost right.
Almost right,
But that was how I felt when I was a kid. I kind of felt that, there was in that band. I feel like there was not a superior musician. You know how some of those bands they got that one guy.
Yeah.
Like Van Halen, like Eddie Van Halen was obviously the driving more gifted guy out of the whole band. But in Rush, that was what blew my mind about that band. There was never a moment that I thought, oh, there's somebody that's a slacker and not as good as the other two. Were they all educated musicians? I mean, did they go to like Berkeley or anything?
Don't think so. No, they're all self-educated.
That is amazing because I always looked at them as a band that technically went to Berkeley.
No, they definitely didn't do that. No, they left school relatively early. I think none of them went to college. They all left school after high school, and just got into bands right away. I don't know if you've seen the documentary Beyond the Lighted Stage.
I've never even. I didn't know it was even out.
You need to see that because you can see this footage of Alex Lifeson with his family, which they're Serbian. And they're all giving him a very hard time. He's a teenager. It's amazing footage. He's saying, why he wants to be a musician, and his father is saying, that's something you do for fun. That's not a living. And they're having this discussion, and it's incredible. They caught it on film, but Alex was definitely he was friends with Geddy, and they had no other options in their life. They were going to be musicians.
But anyway, I got more to ask you because Queensryche, Operation Mindcrime record changed my life, inspired me to be a producer. And I want to know just how was the vibe. But was it a fun record or was it serious? Was it dark?
It was a difficult record because a lot of the dialogue and the concept was kind of, as we were going along, it was evolving. It evolved. I mean, the basic outline was there, but the details of the dialogue and the sections in between the music, that was all kind of created as we went along. And it was difficult because also we had decided to, checked out studios and decided to go to KGM Victory in Philadelphia. It was an old Derringer pistol factory. And it was just an untreated factory space. And I wanted that for the drums there. So the band had to pile into a van and come totally across the country from Seattle and live in, with the roadies and everything in like a 2-bedroom apartment because money was so tight.
Really?
Yeah, so it was difficult. And we also had to, really work very hard with just sonically to get it where it was and get the bass really slamming. Jimbo Barton, the engineer on that, did a great job with Eddie, the bass player. And that was actually very difficult getting, because now everybody's got that bass sound, but in those days nobody really had that really overdriven.
I know it was risky. And did you feel? To me, that's probably up to that point the riskiest production I think I'd ever heard. But of course, I was young, but I just remember thinking that was not normal because Zeppelin and them, they had their production, but it was not near as risky. And when I say risky, the tones, the feel of the record, the overall vibe of the record is like, it's almost like Black Sabbath, and I'm a Black Sabbath fan too, but almost like they tried to get that Operation Mindcrime thing, but you kind of perfected that sound and vibe.
We weren't trying to copy anybody.
No, but I was saying, you just made it where that darkness was not what was easy to listen to.
Good. Well,
You know what I'm saying?
I do know
what
what you're saying. I mean, part of my job on that record was also to make it more appealing to a wider audience. And that involved also trying to work with Jeff Tate, the singer, to kill some of the heavy vibrato, which is, very symptomatic of the kind of cheesy, over-the-top rock singer,
Right.
with the high-pitched voice going, "Hey!"
Right.
That was not a good Jeff Tate impersonation, but he did have a very heavy vibrato in his voice, which I wanted to back off for this record to make it more acceptable. So that again was another element of quite hard work in doing the vocals and also getting diction really clear for him because the lyric content was so important for telling the story.
Do you feel like you because one of my questions were the perfect vocal take and what you look for in a vocal take like that, and I do the same thing, and I got that from you. Now I know where I get that from because I always say, hey, using vibrato like that is a sign of weakness as a singer. You can't really say that to Beyonce. But
yeah, it depends how you use it. But in the genre of hard rock, it can be quite cheesy.
Right. So okay, good. So I'm not telling them because that's where I got that from was you. That's pretty incredible because I didn't realize why because I just and I don't know if you told me it was a sign of weakness. I think that was just to.
I don't think it's a sign of weakness. It's
just to reel the freaking singer back from using so much of it.
Yeah, it's stylistically undesirable, I think, for a wider audience.
I want to talk about. I want to ask you: was there any of the Queensryche records of Operation Mindcrime where you got that take, or did y'all lean on overdubs a lot? Did you lean on overdubs a lot? Did you do the drums? Okay,
we did lean, but
everybody does.
We'd have the band playing all together, but we were playing to get a drum take.
Okay, so it's just like we did it when I worked for you.
Yeah.
Okay, because I've always wondered about that because you can tell that you can't tell that the music speeds up and slows down, but you can tell it has feel and it's not mechanical. You know what I mean? And on the Queensryche stuff, and I wonder, like, how we used to have a lot of tuning problems. Was it really hard back then, the tuning, or was it?
Yeah, it was very hard because we didn't have the.
So it was just a bashing of it, like when I worked for you.
We didn't have the devices as sophisticated as the devices are these days for tuning pitch. And I'd like to think that I'm, a very perfectionist when it comes to pitch. I really get bent out of shape if anything's out of tune.
Right.
And so we spend a lot of time having to just get it right without using devices to fix tuning. Just have to sing it right or play it right, play it in tune.
Okay. So I want to move on. Well, I want to ask you one more thing about the Queensryche stuff. And this is kind of an ego freaking question, and I don't want you to feel like you can answer any way you want to. Do you feel like the Queensryche, the Operation Mindcrime, do you feel like it changed the course of rock and roll? Because I do.
I believe it did.
Awesome, because
Pink Floyd had done concept album, Meatloaf. The notion of a concept record was not new, but the actual taking the story of a young guy who gets caught up into a revolutionary movement, a terrorist movement, and his story that was relatively new, and just the way we did it, and the dramatic elements, and the British, taking a North American band and using British actors to do the speaking parts, gave it a really distinct flavor as well.
And do you, okay, I want to ask you, are you mad at me for stealing the concept in Full Devil Jacket?
Livid. I'll never, ever forgive you.
Because we got all
People are going to pay you a visit.
all these segues I put there. I went, man, Peter's going to be like, God, this is Operation Mindcrime again. It wasn't a concept record as far as the story goes, but it was like to flow and supposed to make sense lyrically and musically, and the segues were ridiculous. I know they were. The record didn't stop till after song 6, and it was just for 3 seconds, and just ridiculous, not letting you rest, just giving you the whole theatrical thing about it, because I wanted to be a theatrical thing. And well, anyway, I've heard that record, that Queensryche, I know this may not be something a lot of people's interested in, but I'm interested in it, so hell. And I had a friend ask me the same question when I talked to him about it. Was that true, actually? I mean, you may not even know anything about it, but the Operation Mindcrime is supposed to be the longest known tour as far as touring on a record consistently for so many months. Is that true, or is that just urban legend?
I don't know, Malcolm. Once I've made the record,
I know you're gone. It's
I'm on to the next record.
I'm a fan, so I have to ask. I have to ask.
But I think they've remastered it. They go out and do an operation. Whatever version of Queensryche it is, they go out and do another.
Right.
Operation
I love it,
Mindcrime
man.
stuff.
I freaking love it. And I had actually Jeff's son-in-law played on a record for me up in Seattle.
Jeff Tate's son-in-law.
Yes, he's an English fella. He's got the mohawk. He looks like a road warrior type of guy. He plays stand-up bass, string bass, and he's incredible too. He played on his country record that I produced, and so I wanted to meet Jeff, but I never got to meet him. I never got to meet him, but hopefully one of these days I will. Hopefully one of these days.
Have you been to an Operation Mindcrime show?
No, I never have.
You get a big kick out of it, particularly when they have back projection, and they have the nurse at the beginning who gives Nicky, the main guy, a shot, and he's in the hospital, and the whole audience, after the nurse says "sweet dreams," and then the whole audience goes, "You bastard!"
I love it.
That's
man.
a wonderful moment.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Okay, so has there been any? We may not can say so, not, but has there been any particular records that you feel were just like pulling teeth? I mean, like I've been on those records. Is there any one particular record, and can you even say that particular record, or that was just like the tune was like so terrible that it was just made things really? Now, I think I know the answer to this.
The hardest record I ever made was Billy Squire's.
I knew that's what you were going to say.
Enough is Enough.
Yeah.
It was a really incredibly difficult record to make.
And was it the songs? Was it his attitude? Or just like
I can't really go into it. But,
okay.
It was tough, and it was nearly a career ender for me. It was so difficult, and I was so lacking in confidence. at the end of that experience that when I got a call from Geddy to produce another Rush record, it was like, thank God, you know.
Because that was when he was rolling around in that bed and all
Yeah.
that. Yeah, that was quite embarrassing.
That was happening in America on MTV when he's rolling around in the soft focus satin sheets.
What happened? I mean, that was the end of his career, wasn't it?
Well, it was, but I didn't realize it because I was in England and people had told me about this terrible video, but I didn't realize it was a career ender.
Oh my God!
So I got involved in the record after that video. It was for the previous record, but it was too late.
And I think what really I might be wrong, but I think if I remember correctly, it was years and years and years ago, maybe 35 years ago. I remember that that was when Loverboy came out too, around that era. Remember, and it really kind of put the fire out on Billy Squires. What I think helped it too, because the Loverboy record kind of took Billy Squires' place. You know what I mean? And anyway, have you? Here's moving on to one more production question as far as being in the studio, because I know some young producers want to know, because I've asked you this question before, and I'd like to think everybody else would like to know your answer. How is it like? I've been there now. I'm older. I remember when I was always the engineer or the second engineer, but I wasn't like you sitting there talking to Bon Jovi behind the thing when he's doing a vocal. What's your mind frame? I mean, is it nerve-wracking the whole time? Do you get comfortable after a certain point? How is it producing someone like that? I mean, you're Peter Collins, I know, but it's Elton John, for instance. I mean, how do you...
It's not nerve-wracking at all. I just go straight into producer mode, and it could be almost anybody. I'm not intimidated one iota by the star quality of the person I'm dealing with. But I'm very focused on the job of getting a great performance which speaks to me, which I believe, a believable performance which has integrity and is clear and is bringing out the best in the artist. And a great example of getting a vocal that I was really pleased with very quickly without the artist actually knowing I was getting her lead vocal was actually Jewel,
Right.
which we started that off at a house in Los Angeles, a house studio, and she went up into the bedroom to do the vocal, and I got the vocal from her in pieces, but all from the vocal. She didn't realize we were recording a main vocal, and that was Foolish Games, which was a big hit.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And so you were just saying, we're sound checking the microphone?
Yeah, I'll often do that. Let's just do a run through. We'll just get some levels together.
Okay.
Always take it.
And always have it ready.
You know my expression that this is not a rehearsal studio.
Right.
Hit record.
Yeah, oh, yeah, I remember that. Believe me, I remember that. Because I was always, with Jackson, when he puts it in input and lets the thing, trying to get sounds, I'm like, Jackson, why aren't we recording this?
Yeah,
what the hell are we doing?
When there's
Always
an
been
artist on a microphone being recorded.
Yes, every time. And I want to ask you more about the business part of stuff now. What did you have to deal with a lot of political with the record companies? Because I've had to, one A&R guy's mad because, well, see me, I get a lot of bands signed too, and you're Peter Collins, so a lot of records, you saw a band, you went after them and they gave you the record, or they saw you and they gave you the record. But did you have to deal with any political issues with managers, lawyers, bumping heads, and you being in the middle, and how to...
Not very often. I had a great management in New York.
Andy Kipnis.
Andy Kipnis, AAM.
He is awesome.
Yeah, they took care of most of those issues, but sometimes, as a record producer, in many cases, you're an interface between the label and the artist. So you're very aware that the label wants something that they can sell, but the artists are not necessarily be driven by commercial considerations. They want to produce, their best artistic representation of who they are. They're not interested in commercial aspects. or getting on the radio as such.
Right.
Well, they won't admit to that anyway because they're true artists and they're doing their thing because they're driven by their inspiration to be creative and express themselves as best they can on record. So my job was always slightly duplicitous. Edit. It was, let's say, coming in between the artist and the label and trying without the artist
More diplomatic.
being aware.
More of a diplomatic type of.
Not to, but I need to get it where I needed to, where the record would have a shot at radio.
Okay, gotcha. So, in the balance between getting the music to where it's sellable and marketable, and what the artist wants and be okay with, and then the label is a balancing beam to me sometimes.
Yeah, I'm sure you've been in that position.
Oh God, yeah, and the matter of fact, one of the songs that Kevin K. Man Shirley mixed for me, the song was originally 6 minutes long, and the label wanted it to be 3.5 minutes, so I made it 8 minutes and 46 seconds, so I could have the edit points to make it 3 minutes.
Great thinking.
Yeah, because I knew the band wasn't going to budge on this, so make it longer to get the edit points.
That's very clever. I never thought of doing that one, actually.
Yeah, because and then the label were really mad when I sent them the original master, and then I'm like, no. This is the edit version here. The one after that is the edited 3.5 minute, 3:35, I think it was, and I noticed that when you dealt with like Happy Walters and people like that, do you keep your distance personally from the record label?
As much as possible. It's very hard if you're the producer and the label's actually hiring you on behalf of the artist. So, if they want to come down and listen, there's not much I can do to stop them other than make it a very controlled situation where they're coming, so you set everything up in lieu of them coming and make sure there's going to be as good an outcome as possible.
And did you find yourself though not becoming so personal in business? And this is questions for me because I'm 52. People say I'm the best I've ever been right now, and all these things, and I don't believe them, but I believe everybody gets better, but I'm saying I think that depends on the record. Did you at some point though go, okay, I got to stop having these personal relationships with these people and make it just strictly business?
No, never.
Never. It always was personal and business.
Yeah, the business side I never dealt with. I just let Andy take care of that. Hire the attorneys. I just trusted him completely, and I was correct to do so. He did a fantastic job for me, and I just set that completely aside. I was always very well paid for what I did and had good points. And, I had it really, in the golden days, I had really good budgets, as you know. Used the best studios, the best engineers, had the best of everything. And so I have no complaints, but I can't really comment on the business side because that was handled for me.
I just got to let my manager handle my stuff and shut the hell up.
If you've got a good manager, you trust him. Yeah, because that's what they're all about. They're going to get the best money and the best deals for you.
Now, my manager, speaking of that, he asked me to ask you this question. Was there a game changer piece of gear or element in a studio that brought it to another level for you? Was there something that came about technology-wise that you went, this changed the game for me?
Well, back in the 80s, there was a keyboard called an emulator. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
And the emulator I used a lot on British pop records. It wasn't relevant for the rock stuff, but I started out producing pop music in England, and that emulator was huge. I used it all the time to create original sounds back in those days. Since that, and I was also, I bought Fairlight, and I had the PPG Wave 2. I had all those great keyboards and all the Linn drum machines that came through back in the 80s. I had all that stuff. And it made a big difference because that was the sounds of the 80s.
Right.
And but after all that kind of set aside, I was just more interested in getting great organic sounds, and sometimes hyping those organic sounds up, but just really getting basic good sounds.
Well, just a couple more questions, and because as a your assistant and production gopher and everything else, I mean, I did it all. We mainly brought guitars and amps, you know. Outboard gear and stuff was kind of Paul's thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's an engineer's thing.
Would you pick studios? Okay, let me back up here. Would you pick studios for the gear? And which console did you want to? Did you feel each console gave you a different tone?
Yes, I did. I was
Okay,
very aware
okay.
of
What
that.
was your favorite one?
Well, those I really liked the E series SSL, very crunchy. I had a lot of success. I think we mixed the power windows on an E series.
Okay,
For example, I like the
freaking
Trident
awesome.
desk. Again, I like the more crunchy desks.
Those are my favorite too. So
Yeah, and the Neve, the old Neve desks. I love them.
yeah, the 8078 and there was an 80. There was an 8038 here somewhere in town we worked on one time. Yeah, because it really
Those are the
flowed.
desks I liked, and I choose studios for their efficiency. And having a great desk. I mean, I work on any SSL really, the G series or whatever.
They're my
But,
favorite too. It's not because they're English, is it?
Actually, all three are English.
They're all
desks,
English
yeah.
anyway. It doesn't matter.
I like the MC, I used the MCI a bit in England as well. That was good, but I think for studios they had to be super efficient because if the studio break down and you've got people wanting to be creative and they can't because the studio's not working, you lose the vibe, you lose creativity. So efficiency in the studio and proper maintenance was hugely important to me.
Now, another gear question: was there any particular microphone that was your go-to microphone for like Jewel and like Elton John and Bon Jovi? Was there any go-to microphone, or was it like did you try different microphones for each vocalist?
That was entirely an engineering issue.
Okay.
I never paid too much attention.
I love that answer.
Yeah.
I do because when someone's engineering for me, that's how I am too, and I get always surprised. It's almost like Christmas for me as a producer when someone's engineering for me. Oh, okay, we're using that. We're using a 48. Oh, we're using a 67. Oh, we're using a C12. You know, I mean, all these different microphones, and each engineer has a different favorite.
Yeah. I've had a great engineer who knows that. What's a good
Right.
sound, so I totally trust him.
I just wanted to ask because one more question. If you were to meet young Peter Collins, would you give him any advice on what he should do differently, or do you not regret one thing? Now, I'm not talking about women. I'm talking about music.
The young Peter Collins. No, I think I evolved quite naturally, and I'm fairly happy. I mean, you learn from your mistakes, and of course, I made a gazillion mistakes, but that's part of the process. You have to be prepared to make mistakes. You have to be fearless going in and not worry and just go with your gut instincts. And I always thought, from record to record, I was getting away with it. I got away with it again. I got away with it again. But now as I listen back to some of the work that I did, I realized actually I did have some talent. And
Oh my God, are you kidding?
but when you're doing it, you think, wow, that was amazing that I got away with it. It worked. And for most of the records I did in my heyday actually worked and was successful. But it was a constant surprise to me. Sometimes you knew you had monster hits. Sometimes it's songs now you knew it was
Right.
going to be a big hit.
Right. You knew Empire when you did the Empire record. You knew.
Yeah, I knew it was going to do well. And,
Or Bed of Roses. I mean, some of the stuff you produced.
well, I did a single with Bon Jovi, which was one of his big.
Yeah, wasn't that
his
Bed of
It was
Roses?
called Always.
Oh, okay. I thought you did Better Roses
No, I
too.
didn't. He
Okay,
did
okay. I'm
that.
sorry.
I think I don't know who produced that, but yeah, had a massive hit with Always.
Oh yeah, remember that.
But
But okay, so do you feel? This is how I feel because I'm in a younger and older group. I'm like in that in between. I'm so lucky to have worked with you. It's been the biggest honor of my life.
thank you,
And I really, really do mean that.
I'm
It was
very
my dream.
I'm very happy for you and how you've become so successful and
Thank you.
enjoying your life and enjoying your
Oh, I am. I couldn't be happier.
That's wonderful.
But from a kid coming from the middle of the country and to work for you was a dream come true. And I feel though, and it's funny because some people totally disagree with me, that we're the Jedi and they're killing us off one at a time, and I'm one of the last ones fighting. And it's like, so I want to ask you. I found out that we can become ordained Jedi masters online. I really want you to do that with me.
Of course, I'll follow you anywhere, Malcolm. Over the edge.
Peter Collins, you are a brilliant producer, and the secret to your success is just be your gut, your heart.
Trust
and
your
everything.
instincts.
Trust your instincts. And
Assume that you're right, even if you're wrong. Just
stick with it.
stick with it. Just
I
stay
love
with it.
you, man.
And
You're
I've
awesome.
seen you do that, and I think it's wonderful. Don't second guess yourself. I mean, you are going to second guess yourself to a certain extent, but make a decision, even if it's a wrong one.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast, man. Thank you so much for coming
pleasure.
in.